I watched through the kitchen window as three strangers in polo shirts walked straight past our no trespassing signs. They carried clipboards and cameras, moving toward our barn like they owned the place. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized what was happening. These were not lost tourists or friendly neighbors. These were HOA patrol volunteers, and they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. Our ranch dog, Rex, stood between them and the barn. His hackles rose as he sensed the intrusion. 70 years of breeding and training had prepared him for this exact moment. Grandpa always said Rex would know when to protect what was ours. The lead man in the khaki pants reached for the barn door handle. Rex stepped forward, his low growl cutting through the morning air like a warning bell. That was when I knew everything was about to change forever. My name is Sarah, and I grew up believing that land meant freedom. Our family ranch sits on 200 acres of rolling hills in what used to be the middle of nowhere. Grandpa Joe bought this property in 1952 with money he saved from his time in Korea. He built everything with his own hands. The house, the fences, and most importantly, the big red barn that has stood strong for over 70 years. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of Grandpa whistling as he fed the horses. The sun would paint the hills gold, and the air would smell like hay and wildflowers. This was our world, and it was perfect. Grandpa was not just my grandfather. He was my teacher, my protector, and my best friend. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, he raised me on this ranch. He taught me how to ride horses, how to read the weather, and most importantly, how to stand up for what is right. Land is not just dirt and grass, he would tell me as we walked the property lines. It is your heritage, it is your freedom, and you never let anyone take your freedom without a fight. Rex, our ranch dog, was more than a pet. He was a working animal, bred from generations of cattle dogs who knew how to protect property. Grandpa spent years training him with whistle commands and hand signals. Rex could herd cattle, guard the house, and sense trouble from miles away. He was loyal, intelligent, and fearless when it came to protecting our family. The barn was the heart of our operation. Its red paint had faded over the decades, but the structure was solid as granite. Inside, we kept hay, tools, and equipment that had been passed down through 3 generations. The smell of old leather and motor oil mixed with the sweet scent of dried grass. Every beam and board had a story, and every corner held memories. For 28 years, this was my entire world. We lived simply, worked hard, and bothered no one. Our closest neighbors were miles away, and we liked it that way. The only sounds were wind through the trees, cattle lowing in the distance, and the occasional truck rumbling down our gravel road. But in recent months, things have started to change. New houses began appearing on distant hills. Survey crews showed up on roads that used to be empty. Fresh concrete and perfectly manicured lawns crept closer to our property like an advancing army. Grandpa noticed it first. "Progress," he would mutter, shaking his head as he watched construction crews clear trees for another subdivision. "They call it progress, but it looks like invasion to me." I did not understand what he meant at the time. I thought development was just part of life. People needed places to live, and empty land was where they built houses. It seemed natural and harmless. I was wrong. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was feeding the chickens when I saw a man in a bright yellow vest standing at our front gate. He was taking pictures of our property and writing notes on a clipboard. When I walked over to ask what he was doing, he just smiled and said he was surveying the county. "Survey for what?" I asked. "Just updating records," he replied. "Nothing to worry about." But something in his tone made me worry. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he kept glancing at our barn, the way he hurried back to his truck when Grandpa appeared on the porch. That night, Grandpa and I sat on the front steps watching the sunset. Rex lay at our feet, his ears twitching at every sound. "Sarah," Grandpa said quietly, "I have been thinking about that surveyor today, and I have been thinking about all these new houses going up around us. What about them?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think our peaceful days might be coming to an end." The first letter arrived on a Thursday. I remember because I was helping Grandpa repair a section of fence when I heard the mail truck rumbling up our driveway. The driver, Pete, had been delivering our mail for 15 years. He usually just waved and kept going, but this time he stopped and walked to the house. "Got some certified mail for you folks," he called out. "Looks official." My stomach dropped. Official mail was never good news. I watched Grandpa's face as he signed for the thick envelope. His jaw tightened as he read the return address. "Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association," he read aloud. "Never heard of them." We sat at the kitchen table as Grandpa opened the envelope. Inside was a letter printed on expensive paper with an official-looking logo. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Dear property owner," it began. "This letter serves as official notification that your property has been included within the boundaries of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. As a property owner within our jurisdiction, you are required to comply with all covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I felt dizzy. "Grandpa, what does this mean?" He kept reading, his face growing darker with each paragraph. "It means," he said slowly, "that some group of people we have never met thinks they can tell us how to live on our land." The letter was full of legal language and demands. We were required to maintain our property according to community standards. We needed approval for any exterior modifications. We had to remove any unsightly equipment or structures that did not conform to the aesthetic guidelines. But the part that made my blood boil was the section about the barn. According to the letter, all structures over 50 years old needed to be inspected by an HOA-approved engineer. If they did not meet modern safety and aesthetic standards, they would need to be demolished or extensively renovated. "They want to inspect our barn?" I asked, unable to believe what I was reading. "That is what it says," Grandpa replied grimly. Over the next 2 weeks, more letters arrived. Each one was more demanding than the last. We were informed that our farm equipment was unsightly and needed to be moved to appropriate storage areas. Our horses were non-conforming animals that violated the association's pet policy. Even our gravel driveway was a problem because it did not meet the paved surface requirements. I spent hours on the internet trying to understand how this could be legal. What I found made me sick. When the county had rezoned our area for development, they had created some kind of master plan community that included existing properties. The HOA had been granted legal authority over the entire district, including our ranch. "We never agreed to this," I told Grandpa. "We never signed anything." "Does not matter," he said. "According to the law, we are stuck with it." The breaking point came when we decided to attend an HOA meeting. The meeting was held in a sterile community center that smelled like disinfectant and air freshener. Grandpa and I walked in wearing our usual ranch clothes, jeans, and boots, while everyone else wore business casual attire. We were the only people there who lived on the land before the HOA existed. The HOA president, a woman named Carol Peterson, had perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She welcomed us with the kind of fake politeness that made my skin crawl. "We are so glad you could join us," she said. We understand you have some concerns about compliance. Compliance, Grandpa's voice was calm but dangerous. Lady, I have been living on that land since before you were born. I do not need to comply with anything. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes stared at us like we were zoo animals. Carol's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. Mr. Johnson, she said, I understand this is an adjustment, but we are all part of a community now. We all have to follow the same rules. Rules? Grandpa stood up slowly. Let me tell you about the rules. I fought in Korea for the right to live free on my land. I have paid taxes on that property for 70 years. I have never bothered a soul or caused any trouble. And now you want to tell me that my barn, which I built with my own hands, does not meet your standards. The meeting erupted into arguments. Other homeowners complained about property values and aesthetic concerns. Someone said that working ranches were incompatible with suburban living. That was when I realized what we were dealing with. This was not about rules, safety, or community standards. This was about erasing our way of life because it made some people uncomfortable. We left that meeting knowing we were at war. The harassment started immediately after the meeting. Every morning, I would wake up to find fresh tire tracks in our driveway where they did not belong. Cars would drive slowly past our property, their occupants taking pictures and videos of everything. Our mailbox was suddenly full of anonymous complaints about noise, odors, and unsightly conditions. But the worst part was the HOA patrol. Carol Peterson had created a volunteer patrol system where residents could sign up to monitor compliance in the neighborhood. These volunteers drove around in their vehicles, armed with cameras and clipboards, documenting every violation they could find. And they were obsessed with our ranch. I counted at least 3 different patrol cars every day. They would park just outside our property line and take photos of our barn from every angle. They measured distances, documented equipment locations, and even recorded the times when our horses were in different pastures. Rex knew something was wrong. Dogs have instincts that humans have lost, and he could sense the hostility radiating from these unwelcome visitors. He would pace the fence line, his hackles raised, whenever the patrol cars appeared. His low growls were constant background noise during the day. Easy boy, Grandpa would say, but I could see the worry in his eyes. They are not worth your energy. The pattern was always the same. The patrol volunteers would arrive in their spotless SUVs, wearing their polo shirts and khakis-like uniforms. They would pull out their professional cameras and notebooks, and then spend 30 minutes documenting every detail of our property. They never spoke to us directly, but they made sure we knew they were watching. I started keeping a log of every visit, 3 times on Monday, 4 times on Tuesday, 5 times on Wednesday. It was like living under surveillance. The anonymous complaints escalated too. We received official notices about our excessive noise from farm equipment. Someone complained that our horses were creating offensive odors. Another complaint claimed that our gravel driveway was creating dust pollution. But the complaint that got to me was about Rex. According to the anonymous report, our dog was aggressive and dangerous. The complainant claimed that Rex had threatened patrol volunteers by displaying aggressive behavior near the property line. They demanded that we either remove the dog or install additional fencing to protect community members. I was furious. Rex had never hurt anyone in his life. He was a working dog doing his job, protecting our property from unwelcome visitors. But somehow, defending our land made him a threat. Grandpa's health started showing strain. He had always been strong as an ox, but the constant pressure was wearing him down. I would find him sitting on the porch at dawn, staring at the horizon with worry lines etched deep in his weathered face. "Grandpa," I said one morning, "maybe we should just sell, move somewhere else, start over." He looked at me with disappointment that cut deeper than any anger could have. "Sarah," he said quietly, "this land is not just property. It is who we are. It is where your grandmother is buried. It is where your parents grew up. It is where I taught you how to be strong. If we run now, we lose everything that matters." He was right, but the pressure was becoming unbearable. Every day brought new threats, new demands, and new violations. The HOA had started threatening fines for noncompliance. They claimed they could place liens on our property if we did not bring everything up to their standards. The barn became their primary target. They sent increasingly aggressive letters demanding immediate inspection and threatening condemnation if we did not comply. According to their structural engineer, the barn posed a significant safety hazard and needed to be evaluated immediately. I knew this was a lie. Grandpa had built that barn to last centuries. The foundation was solid concrete, the frame was steel-reinforced timber, and the roof had been updated just 5 years ago. But the HOA did not care about facts. They cared about eliminating everything that did not fit their suburban vision. Late one night, I was doing research online when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. The Meadowbrook Hills development was being built by Peterson Construction Company, the same Peterson as Carol Peterson, the HOA president. I dug deeper and found more connections. The real estate agent who had been calling us about selling was Carol's sister. The structural engineer, who had condemned our barn without even seeing it, was Carol's brother-in-law. The anonymous complaints were all being filed by the same 3 people, all of whom lived in the first phase of the development. This was not about community standards or safety concerns. This was about driving us off our land so Peterson Construction could expand its development. They wanted our 200 acres for more suburban houses, and they were using the HOA as a weapon to force us out. I showed my research to Grandpa. He studied the documents for a long time, his face growing harder with each revelation. "So," he said finally, "they want to play dirty. What do we do?" Grandpa smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "We prepare for war." The final ultimatum arrived on a Monday morning in May. This time, it was not just a letter. It was a full legal packet with official seals and threatening language that made my hands shake as I read it. Notice of mandatory inspection, the cover page declared in bold red letters. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in emergency condemnation proceedings. I found Grandpa in the barn, oiling a piece of harness leather. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. This building had been his sanctuary for 70 years, and now strangers wanted to violate it with their clipboards and cameras. "They are demanding immediate access," I said, handing him the packet. "They want to bring in a structural engineer, a safety inspector, and a compliance officer." Grandpa read the documents carefully, his weathered hands steady despite the rage I could see building in his eyes. 72 hours, he said quietly. "They want us to open our barn to strangers in 72 hours, or they will have it condemned." Can they do that? They think they can. He set the papers down and looked around the barn. "Sarah, this building has survived tornadoes, floods, and 70 years of hard use. The foundation is solid granite. The frame is steel-reinforced oak. The roof is metal and concrete. There is nothing unsafe about this structure." I knew he was right. The barn was built like a fortress, but I also knew that safety was not the issue here. This is not about safety, I said. This is about forcing us out. I know. Grandpa picked up the papers again. Look at this list of required inspections. Structural integrity, electrical systems, plumbing, ventilation, fire safety, chemical storage, and animal welfare accommodations. They want to inspect everything. What happens if they find violations? They will find violations, he said grimly. Even if there are none, they will find them, because the goal is not to pass inspection. The goal is to create grounds for condemnation. I spent the rest of the day researching the legal implications. What I found was terrifying. If the HOA declared our barn unsafe, they could obtain a court order for immediate demolition. We would have no time to appeal, no chance to make repairs, no opportunity to fight back. But the more I dug into the legal documents, the more I realized that Grandpa had been preparing for this fight longer than I knew. He had been quietly gathering evidence, documenting every interaction, and building a case of his own. "Grandpa," I said that evening, "I found something interesting in the county records. Did you know that our property was never properly included in the HOA boundaries?" He smiled. "I know a lot of things, Sarah. The question is whether we can prove them when it matters." "What do you mean?" "Come with me." He led me to his office, a small room off the kitchen that I had always assumed was just for paying bills and keeping ranch records. But when he opened the filing cabinet, I saw something that took my breath away. Dozens of folders, each labeled with dates and topics, HOA correspondence, property surveys, legal research, harassment documentation, trespassing incidents, photographic evidence. "Grandpa, when did you do all this?" "I have been preparing for this fight since the first letter arrived," he said. "I may be old, Sarah, but I am not stupid. I knew what they were trying to do, and I knew we would need ammunition when the time came." He pulled out a thick folder labeled Property Rights and showed me documents I had never seen before. Original deeds, survey maps, court cases, and legal precedents. Our ranch had been in the family for 7 decades, and every transfer had been properly recorded and legally documented. "The HOA thinks they can use bureaucracy as a weapon," he said. "But I have been dealing with bureaucracy since before they were born. I know how to fight fire with fire." The next morning, we received a phone call from Carol Peterson herself. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I wanted to personally reach out about the barn inspection. I know this feels intrusive, but we are only trying to ensure everyone's safety." "Safety," Grandpa repeated flatly. "Yes, safety. And I want you to know that if there are any issues found during the inspection, we are willing to work with you on solutions. We are not trying to be difficult." "What kind of solutions?" "Well, if the barn cannot be brought up to modern standards, we have connections with demolition companies that offer very reasonable rates. I happen to know that Peterson Construction would be willing to make a generous offer for your property. You could relocate somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle." The mask had slipped. This was not about safety or compliance. This was about stealing our land through legal manipulation. "Miss Peterson," Grandpa said, his voice dangerously calm, "let me make something very clear. That barn was built by my hands and my father's hands. It will stand long after you and your development company are forgotten. And if you think you can steal my land through paperwork and intimidation, you have seriously underestimated who you are dealing with." "Mr. Johnson, I think you misunderstand." "I understand perfectly. You have 72 hours to stay off my property. After that, anyone who trespasses will be met with the full force of the law." He hung up the phone and turned to me. "Sarah, they are going to try to force their way in. Are you ready for what comes next?" I looked at my grandfather, this man who had raised me to be strong and fearless. "I am ready." "Good, because tomorrow we find out what they are made of." The invasion came at exactly 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. Grandpa and I were at the county livestock auction, 40 miles away, looking at cattle we had no intention of buying. It was a decoy trip, part of Grandpa's plan to draw the HOA patrol into making their move when they thought we were gone. But we were not gone, and we were not unprepared. Rex had been left with specific instructions. For weeks, Grandpa had been training him with new commands, reinforcing his territorial instincts, and preparing him for the confrontation we all knew was coming. The dog understood that strangers approaching the barn meant danger, and he was ready to do his job. I was nervous about leaving Rex alone, but Grandpa assured me he could handle whatever came. "That dog has been bred for this," he said. "His ancestors protected ranches from wolves and rustlers. A few suburban bullies will not be a problem." We positioned ourselves at the auction house where we could see the parking lot and planned to return home at the first sign of trouble. Grandpa had installed new security cameras around the property, and his phone was set to alert him the moment anyone crossed our fence line. The alert came at 9:15 a.m. "They are here," Grandpa said, checking his phone. "3 vehicles, 6 people. They are heading for the barn." We raced home, driving faster than was safe on the winding country roads. My heart hammered as I imagined what was happening on our property. Rex was a good dog, but he was outnumbered and facing people who had no respect for boundaries. The HOA patrol had come prepared for war. When we pulled into our driveway 20 minutes later, I saw 3 SUVs parked near our barn. A man in a bright orange safety vest was measuring the barn's dimensions, while a woman with a clipboard took photographs. Another man was trying to force open the barn door while Rex stood directly in his path. Our dog was magnificent. He had positioned himself between the intruders and the barn, his body language radiating controlled aggression. His hackles were raised, his ears were forward, and his eyes were locked on the man trying to enter our building. He was not attacking, but he was making it clear that no one was getting past him. "Get that dog away from here," the man at the barn door was saying. "We have legal authority to inspect this structure." "Legal authority," I muttered as we got out of the truck. "They do not have legal authority to breathe on our property." But the situation was about to get much worse. As we approached the group, I saw that the woman with the clipboard was on her phone. "Yes, we need animal control out here immediately," she was saying. "We have a vicious dog preventing us from conducting a legally mandated inspection. The animal appears to be uncontrolled and dangerous." "Dangerous," I shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That dog is doing exactly what he is supposed to do. He is protecting our property from trespassers." The HOA patrol turned toward us with expressions of righteous indignation. Carol Peterson herself was there, wearing a hard hat and carrying a folder full of official-looking documents. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "we are here to conduct the mandatory inspection as required by law. Your dog is interfering with a legal proceeding." "My dog is protecting my property from people who have no right to be here," Grandpa replied calmly. "And unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, you are trespassing." "We have HOA authority." "You have nothing," Grandpa interrupted. "Get off my land." But Carol was not backing down. We are not leaving until this inspection is complete, and that dog needs to be removed immediately." That was when I heard the sirens. 3 police cars and an animal control truck came roaring up our driveway, their lights flashing and radios crackling. The cavalry had arrived, but I was not sure which side they were on. The first officer out of the lead car was Sheriff Deputy Martinez, a man I had known since childhood. He looked around the scene with professional calm, taking in the HOA patrol, the official documents, and Rex still standing guard at the barn door. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. Carol Peterson immediately launched into a prepared speech about legal inspections and dangerous animals. She waved her documents around like they were magic talismans that could transform trespassing into righteousness. "Officer," she said, "we are here conducting a legally mandated inspection of this unsafe structure. The property owner's dog is preventing us from carrying out our duties and appears to be aggressive and uncontrolled." Deputy Martinez looked at Rex, who was still standing quietly at his post. The dog was alert and ready, but he was not showing any signs of aggression beyond his defensive posture. "Has the dog attacked anyone?" the deputy asked. "Well, no, but—" "Has the dog bitten anyone?" "No, but he is threatening." "Ma'am," Deputy Martinez said patiently, "that dog is standing on his owner's property, not bothering anyone. If you feel threatened by him, you are welcome to leave." Carol's face turned red. "Officer, we have legal authority to conduct this inspection. We demand that you remove this animal so we can do our job." That was when Grandpa stepped forward. "Deputy Martinez," he said quietly, "I would like to file a complaint for criminal trespass against these individuals. They are on my property without permission, they ignored my posted no trespassing signs, and they are attempting to force entry into my barn." The deputy looked at the HOA patrol, then at the posted signs they had ignored. "Do you have a warrant for this inspection?" "We do not need a warrant," Carol said. "We have HOA authority." "Ma'am, HOA authority does not override property rights. If you do not have a warrant or the property owner's permission, you are trespassing." The animal control officer, who had been watching the whole scene, finally spoke up. "I do not see any evidence of a dangerous animal here. That dog is just protecting his territory, which is perfectly normal behavior." I watched Carol Peterson's face as she realized her carefully planned ambush was falling apart. The legal authority she had been waving around meant nothing when faced with actual law enforcement. Her volunteers were looking nervous, and her official documents were just expensive paper. But this was not over, not by a long shot. What happened next was the most impressive display of preparation and legal knowledge I had ever witnessed. Grandpa had been quiet during the initial confrontation, letting the HOA patrol reveal their true intentions. But now it was time for him to show his cards. "Deputy Martinez," he said calmly, "before these individuals leave my property, I would like to present some evidence of ongoing harassment and attempted fraud." Grandpa walked to his truck and returned with a thick folder that he had been carrying since we left the auction house. He opened it methodically, like a lawyer presenting a case to a jury. "First," he said, "I want to show you the documentation proving that these individuals have been trespassing on my property for weeks." He handed the deputy a stack of photographs, each one dated and time-stamped. The images showed HOA patrol vehicles parked on our private road, volunteers measuring our barn from inside our property line, and people taking photographs while standing on our land. These photos were taken by security cameras I installed after the harassment began, Grandpa explained. Every incident has been documented and saved. Carol Peterson's confidence was starting to crack. Those photos do not prove anything, she said. We were conducting legitimate community monitoring. From inside my property line, Grandpa asked, while ignoring no trespassing signs. He turned to the next section of his folder. Second, I want to show you the evidence of fraud and conspiracy. This was the part I had been waiting for. Grandpa had been investigating the HOA for months, and his research had uncovered connections that went far beyond simple neighborhood governance. Deputy Martinez, he said, did you know that the HOA president, Carol Peterson, is the wife of the owner of Peterson Construction Company, the same company that has been trying to buy my property for the past 6 months? He produced documents showing the corporate connections, the attempts to purchase our land, and the suspicious timing of the HOA's formation. The evidence painted a clear picture of a scheme to use legal harassment to force property sales. This is not about safety or community standards, Grandpa continued. This is about using the HOA as a tool to steal property for commercial development. Carol's face was now bright red. That is a serious accusation, Mr. Johnson. You cannot prove. I can prove everything, Grandpa interrupted. He pulled out another stack of documents. Here are the county records showing that my property was never properly included in the HOA boundaries. Here are the legal precedents establishing that existing property owners cannot be forced into HOA membership without their consent. And here are the harassment complaints I have been filing with the county attorney's office. Deputy Martinez was studying the documents with growing interest. Mr. Johnson, these are some serious allegations. Are you saying that this HOA does not have legal authority over your property? That is exactly what I am saying. And I am also saying that these people have been using fraudulent claims of authority to harass and intimidate my family. But Grandpa was not done. He turned to the animal control officer and smiled. Officer, he said, I understand there have been complaints about my dog being dangerous and uncontrolled. I would like to demonstrate just how controlled he is. Grandpa walked over to Rex, who was still standing guard at the barn door. The dog's eyes never left the intruders, but his ears turned toward Grandpa as he approached. Rex, Grandpa said quietly, come. The dog immediately left his post and walked to Grandpa's side. Sit. Rex sat, his posture perfect and his attention focused on Grandpa. Down. The dog lay down, still alert but completely calm. Stay. Grandpa walked 20 feet away. Rex did not move a muscle. Watch. Rex's head turned toward the HOA patrol, his eyes tracking their movements, but his body remained still. Good boy, release. Rex stood up and walked back to Grandpa's side, his tail wagging slightly. Officer, Grandpa said to the animal control officer, does that look like a dangerous, uncontrolled animal to you? No, sir, the officer replied. That looks like a very well-trained working dog. Rex is a livestock guardian dog, Grandpa explained. He has been bred and trained to protect property and livestock. When strangers trespass on his territory, he responds exactly as he should. He does not attack, he does not bite, but he makes it clear that he will not allow unauthorized access. He looked directly at Carol Peterson. The only reason anyone would consider that behavior threatening is if they were doing something they should not be doing. Deputy Martinez closed the folder of evidence and looked at the HOA patrol. Ladies and gentlemen, based on what I have seen here today, I am going to have to ask you to leave this property immediately. But our inspection, Carol began. Your inspection is not happening, the deputy said firmly. You do not have legal authority to be on this property, and you do not have the owner's permission. If you do not leave immediately, I will be forced to arrest you for criminal trespass. The animal control officer added, and I will be filing a report stating that the dog complaints were unfounded. This animal is well trained and poses no threat to public safety. I watched the HOA patrol pack up their equipment and retreat to their vehicles. Their confident invasion had turned into a humiliating defeat, and they knew it. But Carol Peterson was not quite ready to surrender. As she got into her SUV, she rolled down the window and called out to Grandpa. This is not over, Mr. Johnson. We will find another way to deal with your noncompliance. Grandpa walked over to her vehicle and leaned down to speak quietly through the window. I was close enough to hear every word. Miss Peterson, he said, his voice calm but deadly serious, let me make something very clear. I have been dealing with bullies and thieves for 70 years. I have faced down armed enemies in foreign countries and survived disasters that would break most people. If you think you can intimidate me with paperwork and lawyers, you are making a serious mistake. He straightened up and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. This is my land, that is my barn, and that is my dog. All three have been here longer than you have been alive, and all three will be here long after you are gone. If you want to fight me, bring everything you have, because I promise you I am ready. The victory that day was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Grandpa's evidence and legal challenges began to unravel the entire HOA scheme. The county attorney's office launched a formal investigation into the Peterson Construction Company's use of fraudulent HOA authority to acquire property. The State Real Estate Commission started looking into the licensing of agents who had been pressuring homeowners to sell under pretenses. But the most satisfying moment came when the county surveyor confirmed what Grandpa had known all along. Our property had never been legally included in the HOA boundaries. The original surveys had been manipulated, and the boundary expansion had been done without proper notification or consent. The HOA was forced to send us an official letter of apology and a statement that they had no authority over our property. They also agreed to pay all of our legal expenses and to place a permanent restriction preventing any future attempts to include our ranch in their jurisdiction. Carol Peterson resigned from the HOA board and moved out of the development within 6 months. Peterson Construction Company faced multiple lawsuits and regulatory investigations that forced them to abandon their expansion plans. The anonymous complaint system was discontinued after the investigation revealed that most complaints were being filed by the same 3 people who had financial interests in forcing property sales. The new HOA board, elected after Carol's resignation, adopted a policy of non-interference with existing properties and focused on their actual responsibility of maintaining common areas and amenities. Rex became something of a local celebrity. The story of the ranch dog who stood up to the HOA spread through social media and local news. People would drive by our property just to see the famous guardian dog who had defended his family's land. He handled the attention with the same calm dignity he had shown during the confrontation. The barn, which had been the center of so much controversy, stood unchanged and uncompromised. Grandpa and I spent the following months making improvements and upgrades, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. We installed new lighting, organized the tool storage, and even built a small office space where Grandpa could work on his legal research. You know, Grandpa said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I think that barn is stronger now than it was before all this started. How do you figure that? Because now we know for certain that it can survive anything. Storm, flood, tornado, or bureaucrats. That barn is not going anywhere. But the most important change was in me. The experience taught me lessons that no school or book could provide. I learned that standing up for what is right is not always easy, but it is always necessary. I learned that bullies rely on fear and intimidation, but they crumble when faced with preparation and courage. Most importantly, I learned that family and land are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Grandpa's health, which had been suffering under the stress of the HOA harassment, improved dramatically once the threat was removed. He was back to his old self, whistling in the mornings and working on projects around the ranch. The worry lines on his face faded, and his energy returned. 6 months after the confrontation, we received an unexpected visitor. Deputy Martinez stopped by on a Sunday afternoon, not on official business, but just to check on us. "I wanted to thank you folks," he said. "Your case opened up an investigation that has helped a lot of people in this county. Turns out Peterson Construction was running similar schemes in 3 other developments." "What happened to them?" I asked. "Multiple fraud charges, regulatory violations, and civil lawsuits. They will be in court for years. And the best part is that several families who were pressured into selling their properties are getting them back." The deputy looked around our property, taking in the peaceful scene. Rex was lying in the shade of the barn, completely relaxed. The horses were grazing in the pasture. Everything was exactly as it should be. "You know," he said, "this whole thing reminded me why I became a cop in the first place. Sometimes the law is about protecting people who cannot protect themselves. But sometimes it is about making sure the people who can protect themselves have the right to do it." After he left, Grandpa and I walked around the property together. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The barn cast a long shadow across the grass, solid and permanent. "Sarah," Grandpa said, "I want you to know that this land will be yours someday. And when that day comes, I want you to remember what we learned during this fight." "What is that?" "That freedom is not free. It has to be earned, and it has to be defended. Every generation has to stand up for what they believe in, or they lose the right to believe in anything at all." He paused and looked at the barn. "Your grandmother and I built this place to last. We wanted to create something that would survive whatever came along. Storms, droughts, economic troubles, whatever. But we never imagined we would have to defend it from people who wanted to steal it with paperwork." "But we did defend it," I said. "We won." "We won this time," he corrected. "But there will always be another Carol Peterson, another scheme, another group of people who think they can take what does not belong to them. That is why you have to stay ready. That is why you have to know your rights and be prepared to fight for them." I looked at Rex, who was watching the horizon with alert eyes. Even in his relaxed state, he was ready to defend his territory at a moment's notice. "I understand," I said. "I will be ready." 1 year later, I am still here on the ranch with Grandpa. The barn stands as strong as ever, housing our equipment and our memories. Rex patrols the property with the same dedication he has always shown, and the land remains free. The HOA still exists, but they learned their lesson about respecting property rights. They focus on their suburban streets and manicured lawns, leaving the rural properties to operate as they always have. The development continues to grow, but it no longer threatens to consume everything in its path. Sometimes I see new residents driving by our property, and I wonder what they think about the old ranch in the middle of their modern neighborhood. Do they see it as an eyesore that needs to be removed? Or do they see it as a reminder of the heritage and history that existed here long before their subdivision was built? I hope they see it as a symbol of what happens when people stand up for what is right. I hope they understand that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the fight becomes. Because in the end, this story is not just about a barn or a dog or an HOA. It is about the fundamental right to live free on your land, to maintain your values, and to resist those who would impose their will on others through force or fraud. It is about the courage to stand up to bullies, the wisdom to prepare for battle, and the determination to never surrender what belongs to you. And it is about the truth that some fights are worth having, even when the odds seem impossible. Our barn is still standing, our dog is still protecting us, and our land is still free.